Abacha, for instance, I was reading narratives in recent times saying that Abacha merely stashed all those monies abroad because of the sanctions against Nigeria, normalizing the evil that was. It's only in Nigeria that you hear such explanations offered by persons who pretend to have use of their brain. Look, here is the reality of our existence. When you turn around and you say, okay, let's find a workaround for these problems, one of the first things they will tell you is automation. That if you have an architectural automation of your governance systems, then you would have dealt with these problems. And that is where they brought in the kind of automated control you have in the passport office with driver's license, port clearances. But what has happened? In reality, you have workaround to automated systems that allowed Larry, weakest bulldog, to be able to have access to INEC server. So capturing all this data, centralizing it, automating it has not meant accountability, because who is watching the watchers? Ultimately, it has only made it easier for those who have captured the Nigerian state to manage the state that they have captured. The Nigerian factor continues in passport issuance in each and every one of look at what has happened with INEC, BVAS, IREV, all the things that work in every other places will not work in Nigeria because of the Nigerian factor. There must always be a workaround to allow the administrators of the system to retain the capacity and discretion to place their hand on the scale. That is the Nigerian factor, a refusal to allow the rules to apply, the law to rule. Look at EFCC and financial reporting. The EFCC has the capacity to trace almost every dime that is transferred using the banking system in Nigeria. But the same EFCC is incapable of tracing bandits, terrorists who are sharing money on TikTok. Why? Because the state is complicit. That is why. The state is complicit. If the state is not complicit, what has blinded the EFCC to the terrorists sharing money on social media? When did it become impossible for the DSS to find terrorists who are on media? That is the Nigerian factor right there. The Nigerian factor has meant that the Nigerian state, which is complicit in the insecurity ravaging Nigeria, has become impotent. It is not for a want of capacity. It is for a want of desire. The government is not interested in fighting its comrade at arms. I remember Bayo Ononuga telling all of us very clearly that the government can speak with the terrorists anytime they want to speak with them, and that they do speak with them. I remember Gumi telling everybody that the government knows who the terrorists are. And I remember multiple members of the armed forces explaining to us that the terrorists are their brothers and sisters. So the Nigerian factor continues to militate against the capacity to fight the evil, because the state itself is complicit in the evil. When the law enforcement is equal, then you will find equality in results. But what you have today is that the laws are treated as mere suggestions because enforcement is selective. So persons believe, well, the law may apply to those ones, it does not apply to me. And that is why it has begun to look as though there is an ethnic coloration to criminality. Evans the kidnapper is in prison. Rightly so. But where is Datijo, the kidnapper? Pardoned, being rehabilitated. Where is Nnamdi Kanu? In prison, convicted, rightly or wrongly. Incitement to terrorism. How many terrorists are daily released by the Nigerian state. Over 700 were released just last week by the Borno state government. Terrorists. These are persons who have borne harms against the state. What about Nnamdi? Why is he there? Nigerian factor. That's what it is. When are we going to tell ourselves that truth? The Nigerian factor has assured that similar crimes are treated similarly. When you are committing your crime, it is critical that you watch the name you bear and what part of the country you come from. The Nigerian factor. If you're going to ever change anything because it is not sufficient, that we lament, solutions must also be offered. The first thing that must happen is that the law must rule. In the absence of the rule of law, the Nigerian factor is sustained and it will persist. It will not end. It will multiply and the problems will fester. And Nigeria will someday implode because the human spirit reflexively rejects injustice. And you cannot sustain this Nigerian factor on the system that has battered it without injustice proliferating. The second thing that must happen is that the judiciary must be truly independent. What we have today is an excuse for a judiciary. There are persons within that judiciary who still speak up for justice, some of them paying great prices. They are in the judiciary. So it's not as if everybody, delivered to me is the saint, everybody are sinners. I'm as much of a sinner as anyone else. And I acknowledge that there are very brave men and women on the bench, but they are very, very few. And it's been made clear to almost all of them that they are an endangered species on that bench, because the system is very, very unapologetic about its own evil intentions. And they have become the reality on the bench. There must be rigid protection for whistleblowers. Have you noticed that since after the whistle blew in Ikoyi, the one that landed the man who is now your ambassador in France, whistle stopped blowing? Because it's not that the whistleblower thing does not work. It's that the law does not work because there is no political will. It's a cascade of reasons multiplied by the Nigerian factors that have assured that this is not happening. A living wage must be paid. A living wage must be paid. You cannot be paying a man under 100,000, give him a gun, give him the authority of the state in a poverty-stricken space such as this one, and imagine that you are not licensing a thief. But because it suits the purpose of the Nigerian state as it is currently structured and governed, to keep the police poor, to keep them hungry, so that they may be bent to the will of their political overlords, they are kept poor. So a living wage must be paid to those who work in public service, so that they might not have the legitimacy of poverty standing behind them when they explain the reason for their corruption. There must be a cultural and value reorientation. As a people, we have given ourselves over to base instincts. And this is very easily understandable. When purpose is unknown, abuse becomes inevitable. The Nigerian has not been directed to any useful purpose for multiple generations. We've only existed as carnal beings, focused substantially on self-titillation, enjoyment, and nothing more. No overarching ambition as a people, not directed to any lofty goal or purpose, nothing. So in the absence of purpose, perversion has become commonplace and normalized in our society. And nurture, above all else, determines the outcome. You have over 20 million children roaming streets. What do you expect to that in the future? All you'll get in the future are ready recruits for the drug lords, for the bandits, for the terrorists, for the kidnappers, for armed robbers, for cultists. The person to whom you have offered no purpose, directed to no use, is inevitably going to become a mercenary in the hand of whatever vice grips them. That is where we are.